Welcome to another episode of Tank Talks, your personal think tank for all things startups and venture capital. I'm your host, Matt Cohen, founder and managing partner at Ripple Ventures. On today's show, we have the CEO and founder of Alyce, Greg Segall, to talk about the future of corporate entertainment and gifting in a post-pandemic world. With over $120 billion spent on corporate gifts and swag each year in the United States alone, it's no surprise that in the last year, corporate clients have had to pivot to find ways to entertain clients in the new remote world. However, with no visibility in how to track corporate gifting performance or ROI, your guess is as good as mine when it comes to figuring out the impact it has on sales. We asked Greg to explain how Alyce's Swag Select platform helps measure and attribute the impact swag boxes have on client sales, and he also shares how Alyce helps clients follow up and connect with customers after hosting events like webinars so they can convert those leads into opportunities. Finally, we dig into what the future will be for corporate entertainment in cities like New York and Las Vegas, and how Alyce plans to spend the $30 million they just raised from General Catalyst in their recent Series B round. But before we get started today, I wanted to share my experience working with the amazing team at Silicon Valley Bank Canada that I believe other founders and fund managers should hear. I've been fortunate enough to get to know several members of the Silicon Valley Bank Canada team over the past few years since they opened up their Canadian HQ in 2019, and have been so impressed with their commitment to the success of our ecosystem. With over 35 years of experience working with founders, it probably comes as no surprise to hear that all they do is work to support the needs of entrepreneurs and their investors. Silicon Valley Bank understands the questions that keep founders up at night. The team in Canada, that includes Shez Samji, Managing Director and Head of Biz Dev, has been a breath of fresh air for the Canadian startup ecosystem. With a team of experts dedicated to supporting Canadian startups, SVB has been providing not only financial services to innovative companies like ours at Ripple Ventures, but also at the fund level for ourselves and our LPs. Shez and his team are also helping build connections to potential partners through their introductions and events, research and insights, and helping leverage their full SVB platform to help our founders succeed globally. With such a rich history as Silicon Valley's banking partner for some of the top tech companies in the world, it's no surprise that we have decided to partner with SVB Canada at Tank Talks so other founders and entrepreneurs can benefit from the incredible products and services SVB offers. Listeners of Tank Talks can get set up with an intro meeting with one of SVB Canada's team members by visiting svb.com/Canada and mentioning Tank Talks to get set up today. Now let's get into today's talk with Greg Segall, CEO and founder of Alyce. Thanks for joining us in the tank today, Greg.
Thanks, great to be here.
So as I mentioned today, I wanted to talk about the future of corporate entertainment and gifting in a post-pandemic world and how your team at Alyce is working to shape the future of this industry. So let's kick things off and discuss the current state of the corporate entertainment and gifting world, which we all know was fundamentally changed due to the pandemic last year. And COVID completely forced companies to rethink their sales and marketing and their entire approach to client entertainment and gifting. So I would love if you could provide our listeners with an overview of what exactly happened over the last year in corporate gifting and give us some of the challenges that a lot of companies faced.
Yeah, so I think there was a couple of key changes that happened in the market, right? First of all events got wiped out. Anything that's in person, as we know, there's nothing surprising about that, as we know. And what happened was everybody started to move very much towards, well, how do we engage digitally with folks? And when you look at it, you start to look at emails, LinkedIn messages, calls, texts, like those are very cheap in the end of the day. And there's not real true ability for you to be able to build a relationship with folks, through that. And when you look at how folks were investing in relationships pre-pandemic, a lot of the tightest ways you can do that was by investing in gifts or swag or events, in terms of those folks. So when that all got wiped away, everyone started to freak out and started to say, well, how do we actually continue to invest in these individuals on a one-to-one basis as we go, especially doing that at scale, now that we can't actually just go to a steak dinner or whatever it was with these individuals. So when you go across those different categories, you go across gifting, you go across swag, you go across events, you start to look that gifting has always been something that was, thought of as a nice to have. And it really became a necessity because you started to realize, if I'm investing into this person and I show that I'm putting time and money on the table for them, it really damn well be better be something that's utilized for that person and actually relatable to what they actually care about that's there. And when you look at swag, similar story there as well, in terms of people actually having affinity towards a brand and not having an office to be able to go to. And on the event side, it's very similar as well, as how do you bring people together in this world where you're staring at somebody inside of a box, here every single day. So tons of changes have happened across the industry. And when you look at them, it's really become more about how do you make all of those channels as personal as possible, as one-to-one as possible, where it makes it about the other person and not about you, especially now that you can't share in those experiences together.
And so in the beginning of the pandemic, everyone was trying to just figure out how to keep their companies alive. But are you saying that you didn't see people stop the gifting part at all? They just sort of rethought about how they were gifting? Or was there a pause and delay in when people were thinking about giving gifts out to companies or customers that they were trying to build relationships with?
I think it was actually the opposite. I think what happened was the pandemic has forced gifting and swag, and sort of the virtual event side of things into the forefront of how you're engaging with individual people. And the reason for that is because there's a difference, again, like, as I said before, like emails, LinkedIn messages are cheap. Investing in gifts and, virtual events and swag is actually putting money on the table. When you do that, it's the most emotive, resonant thing that you can do to that person. And it's also the most relatable thing where you can actually build some sort of a personal connection out of that as well. So actually what COVID did is force that into the limelight in terms of the channel that actually effectuated the most change for anyone trying to actually build relationships in this time.
Wow, interesting. It sounds like it benefited just like other, SaaS companies benefited from the acceleration of digital adoption. And it just was at one of the sort of crossroads of people doing the old type of, entertainment and gifting processes, now had to rethink it. And it wasn't like they shut it off. They actually brought forward the digital connections with building relationships with some of their clients, which is great to hear. And obviously, I think your team at Alyce has benefited from that tremendously. But the corporate entertainment industry has been around for decades. I mean, corporate gifting has been around for a long time as well. But we've also seen startups and tech companies really take a liking to this for several years prior to the pandemic. Why do you think that's the case?
So startups are always more nimble than larger organizations. And typically you have, the typical early adopter curve in terms of what people are doing. You have to look at it in terms of there's a much bigger shift that's happening in the market right now. And that shift is going from this whole quantity game, right, where the last 15 years have been all about automation and sequencing and cadencing, people to death, and shifting that much more to the quality game and going from this world of touches, right, which is a super creepy word in sales and marketing, to how are you actually building moments with individual people on a one-to-one basis. And when you look at that, it fundamentally makes you think, well, I have to get to one-to-one. It's the holy grail of what everybody has always tried to do. Now what's happening is you're even realizing all the emails and all of the other strategies that people have taken before are all becoming much more about the quality of that outreach and the quality of that engagement throughout the sales and marketing funnel, even employees, partners, everything else that's happening. You have to actually show that you care. And it's very easy right now in this period right now where it's so much about inauthenticity. How do you actually scale authenticity? So people have been just scaling the wrong thing. And now when you're looking at this, and even when you're looking at gifting and, you're saying corporate events and, and entertainment, that actually has been around for hundreds of years because people have still been doing all those things the same way. It's just now people have realized that I'm spending more money on that than any other channel out there right now. How do I actually, that can have the most negative impact on somebody or can have the most positive impact on somebody? How do I make that, as scalable as possible in terms of how it's being done authentically instead of here's another squish ball, right? Or here's some other, I don't drink coffee and I get more coffee cards than you could ever imagine, around that as well. It's a complete waste of time and money, and actually has a negative aversion to my reaction to it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, establishing the ROI and the authenticity in entertainment and gifting is extremely hard to do. And it's even probably more difficult to do in a digital age. We know large corporations spend thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars on sporting events and, fancy dinners and networking events. And we call that the steak and handshake kind of corporate entertainment. Do you think that style of entertainment has any risk of going away? And do you think the authenticity with what you're trying to do in the digital space is even comparable to that kind of steak and handshake entertainment event side?
It's all converging. And I think that it's not going away. I just think it's going to become more relevant to the folks that actually want to do that. And I think people are going to realize that few is better than many and one-to-one is better than few. So everything that's moving in the market right now is moving from this whole one-to-many approach to, one-to-few to one-to-many. And you've got to understand, how do you treat that as you go through the cycle. And, if you're thinking about it in terms of sales and marketing, customers are worth different values to a specific company. And that sounds very transactional, but it's true. The people inside those organizations also have different pull. So you're trying to influence those different people and build the relationships with the right folks inside those organizations. Every company has a different champion that they're working with, or set of champions that they're working with as well. So that's not going away. It's something where you take me to a Red Sox game, I'll go all day long. You try and take me to a New England Revolution game, a soccer game, I'm not going to go. And I also don't play golf. So don't take me to a golfing event, even though I get invited to 10 or 15 a year. It's just going to become much more about the relevance of that specific event and that specific investment into the relationship at the right place at the right time for these individual folks. And that's been the missing piece. And it has not been able to be scalable. And that's where technology like Alyce comes into play, which it actually allows you to get to that one-to-one, make a one-to-many feel like it's one-to-one.
Right. So not that one size fits all steak and handshake entertainment for every one of your clients in sales and marketing, but having a bit more of an authentic one-to-one approach, which is what Alyce is trying to solve. And we'll get into that in just a moment. So, with everybody working from home for the last year and no ability to entertain clients, how quickly did you see some of those legacy corporate clients pivoting to finding new ways to entertain clients with solutions like Alyce?
It was a huge tailwind for us, because immediately a few things happened in COVID, and it happened very, very quickly in succession. So you sort of go back to the April timeframe, of last year, and you started to see this quick, massive move of, we still have to hit our numbers. We don't know how long this thing's going to last. And so everyone started to pivot their money away and saying, our events are being killed off. What else do we move into? So we actually had the most inbound and the most, customers through that sort of April, May timeframe that was there. Then you got to the next stage, which was, okay, well, who's actually just trying to figure it out versus who actually is trying to build some sort of a program around this. And there was a lot of early education on it because of the flood of all the money that was being taken from events, to those places. Then you got sort of that Mayish time frame, and I think you started to see a lot of these companies clam up their budgets, and there was all of a sudden this massive move of we're going to get rid of our event budgets because we're going to start to go into a cash conservation mode, because now all of a sudden it's getting worse than we thought it was going to be. And that actually still helped us in that case, because a lot of the remaining budgets were still being appropriated and saying, well, how else can we do smaller things that would actually, affect this, versus having to buy $10,000 box tickets for whatever it might be, or anything like that, where you can send off, 1,000 gifts, to somebody or whatever it was, and actually have that be on a one-to-one basis in those relationship-based places there. And then ever since then, it's just gotten more and more understanding that this has been, when you're building a relationship, you're investing in that relationship. So it's just becoming more and more pertinent that it is personal, right? Like the shirt I have on right now. It's it is all about, how do you make that experience as one-to-one as possible and make it about the other person and not about you. That is the fundamental change. And the companies that get that now are actually engaging and building those relationships so much better right now than the folks that are still in this spray and pray mindset of everything is one to many, because that's the way we've always lived our life. So I think there's this really, COVID's forced people to understand that, I'm not seeing your background right now, but you see my background, you'd be like, oh, you must have kids because you have, 4-year-old books, sitting behind you. You actually in the personal space of these individual folks now in their homes. And that has changed the game in terms of, how do you actually get to know a person and show that you actually care about them, rather than just being yeah, I'm just going to keep doing these things because that's how I've done it for the last 20 years. That time and place is over, especially how technology can actually help fundamentally change that experience.
That's really interesting to hear you say how the COVID and pandemic has brought people closer together, especially in their personal lives mixed with their professional lives, because you're right. We do see them taking Zoom calls from their bedroom with their kids running in, or from their, basement with all the stuff they have in their, man cave or something like that surrounding them, rather than doing a phone call or a Zoom call in somebody's blank canvas office. And that has allowed you to build a closer relationship with your customers in a digital age. And Alyce has captivated that also in the gifting side of things. But, are the swag boxes just a sort of stopgap solution before we go back to work and people go back to that corporate entertainment side? Or do you think it's here to stay?
One thing just to hit on what you're just talking about is, we call it the 5 to 9. If you think about it, the 9 to 5 is your professional life. The 5 to 9 is your personal life. And right now they're kind of mashed together, right, in terms of this, which is where you get a chance to see my background and my kids. Obviously my daughter's at school right now, but like typically she's been running in all morning on my meetings since like 7:30 this morning and saying like, "Hey, Dad," and then it's like the cute moment that everybody has, with their kids running in and out. So just as a qualification, like that's really been something that we've seen come together, that I think people are much more comfortable with the 5 to 9 being a part of the 9 to 5. And that's just, again, when you're investing into things or tickets or whatever it might be, it is about the 5 to 9, which actually drives the relationship, the trust factor, the relatability in the 9 to 5. That's there too. In terms of your question on the swag boxes, I just think there's going to be this consistent evolution of how much more personal can you make every one of those investment points as you go through the process. And right now, there's this whole notion of, well, I just got to do something, to get it out there. It's all about the time, the place, and the use case, and the reason for why you're actually doing something, and then how does the relatability of that actually match, what you're trying to drive towards, that's here. And the companies that are understanding that to that level of detail in terms of where are you in the relationship with somebody, like in the sales and marketing funnel, when you are getting deeper in the relationship, you've already had 5 calls, 10 calls with somebody, you're getting to know them, and you should actually be weaving in the 5 to 9 into the 9 to 5 through that, because that's where you're building it. Me talking to you about, baseball or golf or, our kids or whatever it might be is a fundamental, way to actually humanize how you're actually interacting with somebody. Now you have trust. Now you're building that loyalty, versus it being like, oh yeah, did you get that thing I sent you, for whatever it was in that swag box on X, Y, and Z? And it's like, no, I don't need your video message inside some fancy box that now I've got to figure out how I'm going to throw this thing away, because it's totally useless to me. I'm not going to have something with some random, company's name on it that's there. So I think the age of attention is over, and the age of action, and driving towards that relationship is really this next stage in terms of how people are actually going to be looking at this. And some of that's going to be qualitative and some of that's going to be quantitative. And that's just the reality of the stage of what a relationship's all about, when you're getting into that. It's funny because I always say relationship, and I hate using that word internally. I say that to even everybody, internally, but that's fundamentally what you're actually trying to build, as a business that's there. So I just view every one of the things we talked about: swag boxes, corporate entertainment, dinners, meals, trips, tickets. It's just going to get more creative, more unique, and more relatable to the actual person you're actually interacting with.
Yeah, instead of using relationships, you can use human connection, but it's a little bit more of a word mouse. So you don't have to use that if you don't feel comfortable. But that's what we use at Ripple.
We have all the like every one of those words. I have like, what's the negative connotation? Like connection is such a surface level word. When you're saying that, it's like connect. Oh, did you connect with me on LinkedIn? It's like, yeah, cool. And then there's the problem is there's no true words, which is why we call it personal experience, or being personal with somebody, because there's the emotive connection to that. Even human, it's like, well, what's the opposite of human? Is robot. What's the opposite of personal? Is impersonal. Like there's a difference in terms of how you actually drive towards something, rather than it being this. Everyone uses the word human or human to human right now, and it's kind of like, yeah, of course it's human to human, but I can still have a technology like automating my human to human connection there. So anyway, sorry, I don't mean to be going on a diatribe there.
No, that's quite all right. I mean, you've talked about this a couple of times on the podcast already, about how many stress balls do you really need to have that before you throw them out and they just take up too much space in your office. But I've heard that over $120 billion is spent in the US alone on corporate gifts and swag. And these generic gift boxes with swell bottles with everyone's logo on them, like I can't have them in my house anymore. And it's becoming a really burdensome gifting process for a lot of people. Do you think, with everyone's access to online shopping, especially these days, the novelty of swag boxes have lost its charm?
No, because take what is good about swag. There's a fundamental concept around swag that is prevalent in terms of how it's received. If you just send me some swag from some random brand that I don't have any affinity to, and secondarily, the item inside of that has no utilization to me, it's literally the most negative version, especially for me, who's like such a sustainability freak, on this. Like, do not do that. So those two things are really the most important pieces of what swag is all about here. And I have a story I can tell you about, in terms of like why Alyce started and one of the impetus, behind that. Swag, if you actually care about the brand, which is why, again, swag is better deeper in the funnel when you're dealing with this, because the relationship is being built and now there's an affinity being built around that brand that's there. When you're an employee, you have all the affinity in the world because you want to rep that brand. You care about that brand, and it's used as a way to actually build connection with you. Like you walking down the street and somebody being like, "Oh, you work at Alyce?" Like you're like, "Yeah, yeah," and that's awesome. That's a really cool feeling. And same thing when you're in the office with somebody, or even just wearing, like we have our swag on, as we're going through our Zoom meetings now. It's cool to see people repping it because it just brings camaraderie. And it's this like unconscious connection between you and the brand, and that the brand is the wholly owned, vision and values that you're actually all adhering to as you go through that process. So swag, the second piece of that is utilization. If you send me a Swell bottle and already have 6, no, that doesn't make any sense. But if I don't have a Swell bottle, which is actually a really nice product, by the way, and they have many different types of Swell bottles, by the way, that are in there, like that's something that for me, it's great. Like I have my water bottle that I use all the time, that's here. This is the one that I care about. But you know what? I don't really have one that's for like my shakes, shaking bottles or whatever it might be. There's utilization. And you know what? And if I have a brand affinity, then great, I'll use that product. There's also differences in terms of how people look at swag too, because some people like don't really care if the thing has a logo on it. Other people are like, unless I actually care about the brand, I'm not gonna use this. Like you'll see somebody that has like a Microsoft and Google and random X, Y, and Z company stuff because they love going to the conferences and taking all the crap that they want from that. And for me, I'm like, yeah, I'm much more of a minimalist, much more of a like, is this something that I really want to show? And when I'm showing you the actual water bottle, like, is this something I want to be affiliated with? So swag boxes are going to be here to stay. And honestly, I think they're just going to get more personal, and I think they're also going to get much more relevant to the actual person that it's actually getting sent to.
Yeah, I feel like the companies sending the swag boxes always want to put their logo on everything so that they see like the free marketing, the free word of mouth of their products out in the wild being used by their employees or their customers and things like that. But it sounds like Alyce is doing it in a way more personalized way, directly to the person's own unique interests. So can we talk about how the Alyce solution actually works?
So when you're thinking about being personal and you're thinking about the 5 to 9, you have to be thinking about the interests of the individual person. What are their interests? What are their like connections, preferences, all the stuff that sort of fits around that, as a whole. And what Alyce does is it's able to find anything socially available, publicly available about a person, and be able to actually match something of relevance in our marketplace to that. And our marketplace has been highly curated, over the last 5 years, with about 30,000 products that are connected through that to saying, okay, well, what are the interests of this individual person? And let's give them something that's relevant to them that's there. But the key is not that, right? In the end of the day, like that's a nice to have, but the reality is the experience. And what we've really, really optimized for is what's the recipient experience like? What do they get to choose from? Because in the end of the day, the power of choice is when you make it about them, not about you yourself, right? It's about you, not me. So what they get a chance to do is to say, okay, well, within this specific budget range of this product, which they don't see the budget range, they get a chance to actually choose anything from the catalog that's there. And now it's utilizable to them, whether it's a branded item or non-branded item. And now they have the opportunity to actually, understand that I'm investing in them. And I don't care what the actual thing is that you take. I care about me evolving the relationship and being able to actually drive deeper into that, as well. So that's the big play in terms of like, how does Alyce scale authenticity? It's about those two pieces. It's like, one, can you find something that's of interest and of relatability that you have with the person? And in many cases, you might not find something, but I send very similar things. Like I'll send a custom map right now as one of my favorite things to send to people, because I'm like, I know you haven't been able to travel, but hopefully this reminds you of your favorite place. How cool is that, right? And then people take it, people don't take it, they exchange it, they don't. I don't get offended by it because I know I'm using Alyce to let them choose what they want at the end of the day there.
Yeah, you're really taking the guessing out of the swag boxes. So the way I understand it is the Alyce solution, asks someone at the company admin to upload a list of recipients to the platform, and then that platform or your platform scours the internet for any publicly available information on those individuals like Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. It kind of sounds like you're using the same retargeting tools that companies like Amazon are using for recommendations of items on their personal preferences. I can't tell you how many times I've said something, and obviously I get an Amazon advertisement for that the next moment. Is that sort of how the technology and the recommendation engine is working? And if so, if that's the case, do you foresee companies like Amazon offering these kinds of services to corporate customers?
Yeah, so it doesn't work exactly the same way. Like we're not actually scraping the microphone, from your phone. We don't have an app, right? So we're not doing that. In our case, again, go back to what I said before. There's a big difference between Amazon's mission in terms of what they're trying to drive versus what we're trying to drive. What is Amazon trying to drive? They're trying to drive repeat purchases and relevancy of other things that you actually need to buy. The second thing is if you look at what I've purchased on Amazon, it's for my daughter, for my wife, for myself, right? We all share the same account that's in there, and it is a cluster of different things that are inside of there. So they're always guessing as to what it might be. On one hand, it might be new gym equipment that I'm trying to build, or buy for my basement. On the other hand, it might be like, new socks, that my wife is looking at or whatever it is. So it's all over the place in terms of that. They're just trying to get you in, they're trying to get more relevant products in front of you at that specific moment. What we're trying to do is get the one relevant product in front of you at the right moment. So there's a big difference in terms of how you think about those two different things. So the recommendation engine for us doesn't matter as much because the person is actually getting the opportunity to go shop and not have to pay for the thing, versus on Amazon where it's like, well, I need to put money down, and Amazon saying, what can I actually put in front of you that you actually need right now? So everyone's asked that. That was one of the questions that happened early on with Alyce, 4 or 5 years ago when we were going for our initial round of fundings. And they're like, why can't Amazon do this? Why can't someone else do this? I'm like, there's just two different missions. You're missing the point in terms of like what they're trying to do versus what we're trying to do here. And it's a difference between investing in the other person versus you investing in yourself.
Yeah. Hey, don't blame me for trying to compare it to Amazon. I think every probably VC thinks the same sort of thing when they hear a company like yours. But thank you for explaining that. And I've also heard you say that companies spend on average $185,000 on swag inventory and another $30,000 on services a year. So let's talk about the measurable part, the ROI. How does Alyce Swag Select platform help measure and attribute the influence selected swag boxes have on the client's sales?
Yeah, one of the other things you mentioned, I want to talk about how it actually works. When you're getting to one-to-one, it's critical that you're getting the folks that are actually building the relationship, actually doing the investment into the other person. So the way our platform works is that it ties in through CRM systems, your sales enablement systems, sales engagement systems, marketing automation platforms, and it's able to, email systems. Like, it allows you to do it in the place and the workflow of where you're actually building those relationships with those individual folks. So the rep, for example, sales rep can go in there and instantaneously be able to say, yep, I want to send something to this person. And immediately, like, Alyce takes care of all the rest. Here's the thing you can send. You just type your message and then you hit go, and it sends it off there. The marketers can control all of the budgeting around that as well, which again has been a big problem that technology solves now, where you can actually control exactly how much is being spent across the entire company. You have audit trails, all the compliance is all built into that. Everything's all a nice tight connection that's there. And when you look at the swag side, or you look at the one-to-many side of things, the marketer can control that, but it still has the same one-to-one feel, where I'm still sending this off these individual people. They go through the exact same experience no matter what. They have a chance to choose what they want. They can, they can take what is offered to them. They can exchange for anything else in the marketplace, or they can donate to a charity of their choice. That's just context into this. The ROI piece is because it's tied into those systems. So when you digitize the experience, instead of me just saying, like, I'm going to go send you chocolate feet to get my foot in the door, and I send that thing off, and then I'm like, okay, well, how many calls did we get back on these things? Like, very, very hard to attribute that to any sort of ROI. When you literally have digitized experience, you can track, did they get the gift itself? Was it sent off to this person? Did they view the gift? Did they go through the marketplace? What actions did they take on that? Did they accept the gift, exchange it, or donate to a charity of their choice, right? Or did they decline the gift? And then that information gets piped into the CRM systems, the marketing automation platforms, the engagement platforms. And now you can run all the reports inside the systems where they're running the reports against all the other places they're trying to track ROI as well. So that's the ROI piece, which is like, it's very, very important that you're looking at attribution of the spend, because as you know from everywhere else, like some of our earliest customers, they're like, yeah, we're just going down to like the Copley Mall in Boston and just buying random stuff and then packaging it up and shipping it off to people. And you're like, so you have a credit card bill you can track, like there's none of that. So now it's much more, honed in on what's the experience you're delivering to people, and then what's the ROI piece that's sitting underneath it. And that's where we put that is what our platform is all about on top of the personal side of things.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. I mean, integrating with Salesforce and the CRM solutions makes perfect sense, and that's where everything lives. So you have to be, connecting to the client sales solutions as well. I remember when we moved offices, how many boxes of old swag were sitting around that we had never used, bottles of hot sauce and, swell bottles and stuff that were never divvied out to customers. And the ROI was negative. 100% it was negative. It meant nothing, which makes a lot of sense why you guys are putting that at the forefront. And I'm sure a lot of your customers love it. Now, you guys recently hosted a webinar that I love the name of called Let's Get Phygital, where you explored how to bring the physical world into the digital world, i.e. physical and digital phygital. Can you explain how Alyce helps clients follow up and connect with customers after hosting events like webinars so that they can convert those leads into opportunities? Because I feel a lot of customers have a difficult time with this issue.
So think about any event like a webinar. You have the pre, you have the event itself, and then you have the post that's there. The pre-event, you have multiple strategies you can use in terms of that. One is you can obviously offer a gift in order to come to the webinar itself. The second thing you do is you can actually say, hey, in order to come to this webinar, we can also offer you like lunch on us, because it's a lunch event that's there, which also helps to drive attendance that's going. In terms of your direct question, which is the post, is you use the same thing. So one of the other features that Alyce has is I can send you a gift after the webinar that's triggered from the marketers, where it's either sent from a specific rep that might be associated to the account or from the marketer themselves. And then in that experience, when they're accepting the gift, they can also conveniently choose a time to actually have a demo of the platform that you're just talking about that's there, or a follow-up call or whatever it might be. And that's totally optional, but that's something that can be done there. And that's a convenience factor at the end of the day. That really helps to tie it. And that helps tie it back to ROI, because now you actually could say it drove this specific meeting, for this as well. So that's sort of the easy, quick, and dirty in terms of how this works. Folks are realizing that, webinars, talking about other changes, like there was 1 million people doing every webinar in virtual event under the sun, sort of the April, May, June, July-ish timeframe of last year, because that's all that people had. And then it was like massive fatigue in terms of it. So now folks have really started to hone in on, instead of these massive, huge events, like how do we get to these like very intimate events, which also, again, has helped to really, shift the market 10 years ahead in terms of where it used to be everything's like these big, bulky, events where I'm like renting out a box office or something, to something that's much more, attainable there too.
Yeah, I for sure can see how many people think that just getting a lead list from a large webinar or a large event that you've hosted is a great ROI for, generating top of funnel, because that's where the MQL, the marketing team, sits to get their qualified leads. But I think like management teams really want to see those leads convert into opportunities. And that's where solutions like Alyce can really help. Is that correct?
Yeah, 100%. And I also want to go back to, what are we talking about here? It's, again, the word relationship, but you have to be authentic in terms of how you're actually driving those people. If you're just saying like, yep, here's this thing, just come to this webinar and that's basically it. It's like, how do you get the individual folks that are building the relationship to invite them to the webinar? Like, perfect example, we're running a webinar today, actually, because we did a big launch of a whole bunch of new features that we put out in Alyce. And everyone that had the relationship sent out the personal invite to the webinar. It's the same thing post-webinar. So everything has to come back down to a marketer's role, especially as you continue to drive, is to figure out how do you go from the air cover spray and pray method that's there to how are you actually fundamentally helping to build these one-to-one relationships and drive that through the business. Because the companies that do that the best are the ones that actually have the best change and the best connection to pipeline and opportunity creation and all the other things that are happening, because people are buying from people, right? Like, people care and will and buy from people that they trust. So that is the fundamental shift that's happening right now, which is, instead of you just bribing somebody to take an action here, it's no. What you're doing is you're actually trying to get this individual to make a tighter connection and tighter trust connection. That's the currency that people are trying to drive towards. That's the piece that people are missing out on right now. And that's what Alyce helps you do, is like really make that much easier process all the way through the funnel.
Yeah, that makes sense. Tying it back from the top to the bottom of the funnel is something we've been striving to do for a lot of years. And it sounds like you guys have really nailed it with the Phygital launch with your platform. Now, I got to ask you, bringing it back to the topic at hand, how has the pandemic affected the entertainment space, events, and corporate gifting? I remember working on Wall Street a decade ago in New York City, and everyone in the city had an expense account. Corporate entertainment was literally the lifeblood of New York City. And with so many companies trying to go digital with tools like Alyce to build those business relationships, a word you do not like, by using corporate gifting and swag and experiences, do you think certain cities who depend on corporate entertainment will be affected or suffer going forward?
No, I just think that they're going to be forced into thinking more intelligently around how they're offering what they offer. And again, like it's not going away. It's just going to be reappropriated in terms of who's actually being invited to the right things, where are people actually deciding is it better to actually do something of big, huge, grandiose, efforts versus these small, more intimate efforts that are there. And I think what's happening is it's moving from these massive, huge things, in events and whatnot, to these much more small, intimate places because you can build the relationships tighter there, right? You can actually have the one-to-one interactions that you're looking to make there. But the big events are not going away. And honestly, there's this pent up, like you can just sense it in the industry, pent up demand right now, where all these the conference worlds, the Chicagos and the San Franciscos and the Vegases, and New York and Florida, Texas, like all these places right now that have like make a lot of money on the events that are coming through. There's going to be this massive wave back to that, and then all of a sudden people are going to be like, yeah, this is a little overwhelming. Some people miss the networking aspects of that, but you can get that in so many other ways. So what you'll see over the next year is this much more, this big move to these much more intimate environments, which I believe is going to be the big play in terms of how the market is going to move and how these other companies, folks are going to have to figure out how to do that. Think of like, I use the analogy, I'm like, how did Best Buy actually survive Amazon and all this change right now? Well, what they did is they built micro experiences inside of their store to do this. So some of these bigger, conference centers might be thinking about that in terms of how they might do this. And I'm not trying to make up their business here, but like, it's always going to come down to that same facet of it's going to go from one to many to one to few to one to one. The more closely you can get to one, the better any of these specific, strategies are going to be for anyone, because it actually is fundamentally allowing the human who's in a different position in the buying cycle now because of how much education and automation is happening. Like, how can I actually, use this as a way to actually understand that you're buying from a human being?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think the cat is out of the bag in terms of how people now try to qualify the ROI, especially with all the tools they've become accustomed to in the digital world during COVID, which they were forced to use. And then let's say they go back to the traditional corporate entertainment space. So like say everyone's going to CES in Vegas this year. It's going to be huge. Everyone's so excited to finally get back into the real world and touch and feel things and meet with people. But then you're saying they're going to look back and say, well, how do we actually measure that? Like, what was the value of CS to us? Because we used to be able to measure it in a digital world with, a webinar, but we're not getting the same results from CS. And so you think there's going to be this hybrid awakening of people taking what they learned from the time they were working from home in the digital environment and overlaying that with what they look for when they go back into the corporate entertainment market in the real space?
Yeah, you have to categorize those big events like a CES versus like a Dreamforce for like a Salesforce. Very, very different reasons for doing those things, right? And even like a toy buying show, that's out there as well. There's very different reasons why you'd invest into those different types of conferences that are there, right? So walk down those ways. CES is actually there because it's brand building, and it's also trying to show off the next big thing and trying to get some sort of coverage around that. And there is ROI. It's like, well, what does that look like? But a lot of it is hype, around that. But you've also noticed even in CES, like some companies were already pulling back from it because it became such a spectacle that it was almost too much work for the actual benefit that they were getting out of it. In the early days of CES, like I went in, I think it was 2005-ish time frame, and it was still already 100,000 people or so. Now it's what, 500,000 or something, ridiculous, amount of people. And the amount of vendors are there. It's like multiple buildings and everything. It's fun for somebody to go through because they want to see what's a cool new product. And it's a way for you to actually get, have like, a lot of people seeing through your things, but it's not nearly as targeted as what it would be. But that's not going away. It's just people are going to invest differently into those types of events. When you go to a Salesforce, like a Dreamforce, it's an ecosystem of people already invested in that thing, and they're looking for how do I get more out of what I'm actually building. It's like a centralized type of a conference that's built around it. So there's a different reason for that. And those companies that invest in that, that's still highly, highly, highly effective because you can still see, well, what leads came out of that. I just think there's going to be a difference around how do you work inside of the conference, pre-conference, and post-conference, even at conference, post-conference, in terms of how people are going to be looking at going and being much more targeted with who are going after, because they want to say, well, there's a lot of people here, but how do I hone in on the people I really want to see at once in terms of what that was? And I think the market was slowly moving towards that. This is just going to make that move exponentially faster. And then you get like the toy shows where you're there because you're actually trying to get people to buy a product, that's there. Like CES is much more about brand building. A toy fair is more about like, I want to have buyers there who are trying to figure out what's the next thing I need to fill my shelves with. So you have to qualify what's the right type of show and what are you actually trying to do and who are the people that you're actually trying to build a relationship with. It's going to be the surrounding elements of that are also going to be very much changed as it goes.
Yeah, that makes sense. The at conference and post conference follow-ups and sort of processes that people have been figuring out, let's say in the CPG space by working, on Shopify and Amazon for the last year, are going to take that same mindset to when they go to a CPG show and say, hey, we were able to target way better and see a stronger ROI from what we were doing on our online webinars, let's say, our online conferences. We need to get the same value out of the physical conferences that we're going to when we're selling our products. Because you're right, there's so much window shopping at CES. It's really hard to focus and target the people who will turn into customers and large buyers of your products. But I think tools like Alyce are definitely going to help people figure out how to do that, existing in-person and post follow-up in the real world as well as they are in the digital space, which sounds like it's going to be a huge windfall for you guys. And it also sounds like 2020 was an amazing year of growth for Alyce, capped off with your recently raised 30 million Series B that was led by General Catalyst with participation from Boston Seed Capital, Golden Ventures, the Toronto-based fund, Manifest, Morningside, and Victress Capital. What are some of the areas of growth that your team is pursuing at Alyce to capitalize on this continuous push towards digitization in the personal connection space with this additional funding?
Yeah, so there's two real key areas, right? One is the go-to-market side, right? We have a ton of demand, for us and for the product as we're going to this. So again, continue to hone the whole entire go-to-market function as we go. And the other side is the product side, right? Continue to evolve and continue to innovate inside of a space that is ever changing, like repeatedly and continuously changing as you go. What's really been awesome to see is there's actually been a lot of money been thrown into the space right now, which is just making it more, it's like nailing down and showing that there's a flag planted that this is actually a huge area of opportunity because people are realizing that this is the place you invest into those relationships. And there has to be a technology solution that's actually tying it to ROI, giving a better experience. And there's a lot of companies that are coming at it from a lot of different, perspectives that are there. We have a much bigger vision that we're working towards right now that I won't go into right now, but it's very much about this whole personal experience, effort. How do you get this to one-to-one? That is really the end game for us in terms of how you do that, because whoever does that wins the game in terms of this. Because there's one thing to be like, okay, I'm fulfilling on logistics and getting something sent to somebody, but there's something else where it's actually feeling like it's a one-to-one experience with somebody in terms of how you're actually interacting with them as well. That's where that trust currency actually is actually built there.
And I understand that your team has also doubled in size in the last year to 170 in 7 countries around the world. How big do you expect the team to get to by the end of this year?
I think we'll probably be on the order of 250 is my guess, maybe larger as we continue to grow here. We're investing in a lot of places that we hadn't invested in before, especially in terms of diversification of how we're going to market, and things there. And a lot of it is predicated on how fast are we investing into those as we start to test those other places out as well. So yeah, there's a lot of things, a couple of new hires that have come on that are going to be really owning some of that investment and some of those initiatives that are there. And I just think there's a couple of huge things we're working on right now that will fundamentally change the game, as well. So, we'll see that come out more later this year, but that's definitely, been huge. So to me, it's less about the number of people. It's more about what are the actual investments that we're making in terms of the initiatives that we're driving forward to really get to that vision, that we're trying to attain over the next, 2 to 3 years.
Wow, that's fantastic. That's amazing growth so far. And I can assume you guys are going to have some pretty big announcements over the next several months. So looking forward to hearing those. Now, before we wrap things up, we always love to ask our guests for their fast favorites, where I list off categories of your top 5 favorites and you give us your quick response. So number 1, what's your favorite podcast?
It was Masters of Scale for a while. That was there. I'm a huge SaaStr fan. I listen to every episode of SaaStr, so that's probably my favorite that's there.
That's a good one. Second, favorite newsletter or blog?
I love Morning Brew. That's my go-to every single morning right now. I've been following them since the early days, so I've just loved to put out the Sunday edition. I think it's been really awesome. It's like my quick early read, every single day.
Good one. Favorite tech gadget?
It's not really. I'm a huge gym guy, a gym nerd. So there's more of the apps, that I'm using, and I have a lot of tech gym stuff right now. I would have to say that it's the Echo bike that I have right now, and the heart rate monitor that's connected to it. Like I just love how it tracks all of the all the activity that I'm doing right now.
No, that's nice. I thought you were going to say the Whoosh for a gym guy.
No, I don't use the Whoosh, but I'm a huge gym nut and fitness fan. So,
well, carrying on that vein, what is your favorite new trend?
I've changed up my gym workout. I used to do sort of the 5x5, and now I've changed to a push-pull legs day. So I rotate that 6 days a week right now. I don't know if that's really a cool trend, but
no, that is. And where do you get a lot of your information on all your fitness ideas?
So I follow a couple of key folks online. My favorite is this guy named Jeff Cavalier. He's been on YouTube for about 10 years, and I started following him about just right when he first started off. And he's this tight connection between like the science and the strength aspects of it. So always understanding like how the body's working behind, the muscle. And so just really doing those right types of exercises. Honestly, I just follow a lot of what he's doing. And then I this is a super geeky thing, but when I'm working out, I built my entire basement into a gym by myself. That was my COVID project. And I'll still put on like bodybuilding videos and stuff on while I'm working out, just so I feel like I'm at a gym. And so my daughter comes down and she's like, "What's going on the TV?" But we do our monkey ninja workouts, together, which is my other favorite trends right now.
Yeah, so you're watching The Pump with Arnold Schwarzenegger trying to get your energy up for the workout.
Yep.
Exactly. And last but not least, your favorite book.
It's funny. I'm not a big reader at all. I'm a video guy. I'm very much a visual audio learner. But the Hard Thing About Hard Things was a big transformational book for me. So that was an early one that I just thought was such a good understanding as to like what it really takes to build out, a company.
Yeah, definitely a big one for a lot of people in the startup ecosystem. Thank you so much for joining us in the tank today, Greg, to talk about the future of corporate entertainment and gifting in a post-pandemic world with Greg Segall from Alyce.com.
Thanks a lot, Matt.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Tank Talks. To learn more about this episode, be sure to go to Apple Podcast or Spotify to find more detailed notes on this episode or to check out previous episodes. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review and a rating as it helps us out a lot. And hit that subscribe button so you can get notified when new episodes come out. Finally, make sure to give me a follow on Twitter @MattyBCohen or @Tank Talk Podcast to stay up to date on new episodes or to be a guest on our show. Till next time,